All right, buckle up, everybody. We're going deep today.
Ooh, I like it.
We're diving into, well, not our usual stomping grounds, right? Leviticus,
Leviticus, that's right.
specifically chapter 27. And, people might hear Leviticus and think, okay, ancient laws, sacrifices, all that.
Right.
And yeah, that's there. But chapter 27, this is where it gets kind of wild.
It takes a turn.
Yeah, it's like they're putting a price tag on stuff.
Yeah.
And people,
Putting a price on things for religious dedication.
for dedication, exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, how much is your house worth to God?
That's the question, isn't it? It's like imagine an ancient auction house,
Uh-huh.
but instead of bidding on possessions, you're bidding on, piety.
Oh, interesting.
The Israelites, they could dedicate themselves, their animals, land, basically anything to the Lord.
Right.
But the thing that gets me is, how did they figure out what all this dedication was worth?
Yeah, like, was there a Divine Kelly Blue Book or something?
Well, not exactly, but they did have a system. Now, it gets complicated.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So, first off, they used the shekel, which was both a weight, AN, a currency.
Wait, so like a gold standard kind of thing?
Yeah, kinda. Like the weight of the metal, that's what determined its value.
Okay, so not just checking your chariot's value online, that's for sure.
No, this was serious business.
But back to people, right. They put a value on human lives. How'd that work?
This is where it gets fascinating.
Hmm.
They had this sliding scale based on, your age and gender.
Okay.
So a man, in his prime, 20 to 60 years old, he was valued at 50 shekels.
50, that must have been a lot back then, right?
Yeah, it wasn't chump change.
So women, same rate,
No, actually, women were valued at 30 shekels.
30.
And children, older folks, even less.
Wow, that's a big difference. Makes you think,
Yeah.
what were they basing this on?
Yeah, it really makes you wonder.
Just purely economic, like how much work someone could do?
Could be.
Or was there like a social thing going on too?
Definitely some social and cultural beliefs in the mix there.
Yeah, because that's a stark contrast.
It is. Sadly, the text itself, it doesn't give us all the answers.
Oh, of course not.
But it definitely gets you thinking about, what was normal back then.
Makes you wonder, like, were those values just symbolic?
Yeah,
Or did they actually affect people's lives?
that is the million-dollar question.
Right. Because, I mean, even today, a price tag isn't just about money, is it?
It never is.
There's like a whole cultural baggage thing going on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so people, check. What about animals? Same system for like cows and sheep and all that?
Yep, they had a system for that too. But just like with people, there were some quirks.
Well, cool. Lay it on me.
First off, gotta remember the whole clean versus unclean animal thing.
Right, the whole kosher thing.
Exactly. Clean animals, those were good for sacrifice, like your sheep, your goats.
Okay.
Unclean, those were off the table.
So if you're going to dedicate an animal, it better be on the right list.
Exactly. Now, here's where it gets interesting.
Uh-uh.
Say you dedicated a boat, but then you're like, I'd rather have a sheep.
Happens all the time.
Well, both the goat and the sheep, they became holy.
Wait, hold on. I dedicate a goat, then trade it for a sheep. They're both holy.
That's how it worked.
That's like a loophole, isn't it?
It does seem that way, yeah. But I think the idea is that the dedication itself, like the act of it, had power.
It wasn't about the specific goat.
Right. It's the intention behind it that matters.
That's kind of deep, actually.
Yeah.
So, like, once you've committed, even if what you're committing to changes, the dedication, the underlying feeling, that stays.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about, like, land, houses? Surely you can't just swap those out.
You're right. Houses and fields, those had much more complicated rules.
I
They
doubt.
had to consider the size, the location, even the Jubilee year factored in.
Jubilee year. Oh, right. Remind me what that is again.
Imagine every 50 years, boom, total reset.
Wow.
Debts are forgiven. Land goes back to the original owners. Servants are freed.
Okay, sign me up for that. A clean slate every 50 years. Not bad.
It was a pretty radical idea.
But how did that, like, work with dedicating property?
So let's say you dedicated a field. Well, they'd figure out its value based on how many years were left until the next Jubilee.
Oh, so the closer you are to the Jubilee,
The less the land is worth.
because it's all going to get reset anyway.
Exactly.
Like divine real estate, but with an expiration date.
That's a great way to put it.
But let's be real. Not everyone could just donate things all the time.
Right. Of course not.
What if you dedicated something and then regretted it?
Well, that's where redemption comes in.
Redemption, like buying your way out of commitment,
Pretty much. You could buy back most dedicated items,
Okay.
but you had to add an extra fifth to the value, like a penalty fee,
Oh, interesting. So there were loopholes,
for most things.
but I bet there were exceptions.
There were. Anything declared devoted. That was it. Off limits.
Devoted. That sounds serious.
It was. Completely untouchable, belonged only to the Lord.
So we're not talking about your old goat anymore.
Nope. This could be anything. Animals, property, even people in some cases.
People. Like, a person could be devoted, and that's it.
It really shows how serious these commitments were.
No takebacks.
Not if you were devoted. Words had power back then.
That's heavy stuff. Like an unbreakable vow.
Exactly.
But let's move to something, I don't know, a bit lighter.
Okay.
Everyday giving, I'm guessing that was a big deal too?
Absolutely. The tithe. Still around today in lots of religions.
Yeah. So, Leviticus, how did they view the tithe?
It was like the core of their relationship with God.
Not just giving back, but acknowledging where it all came from.
Precisely.
Okay, break it down for me. What were they tithing on exactly? And how'd it work?
So imagine you, the listener, you're a farmer back then.
Okay.
It wasn't about money. It was about your livelihood. Your grain, fruit, 10th lamb born, that sort of thing.
And no trying to, like, swap a bad goat for a good one?
Nope. No loopholes with the divine accountant.
Why so strict? What's the point of no swaps?
It was about the whole picture, the good and the bad, good harvest, blight, everything. It's like accepting it all as part of this relationship with God.
That's so different from, like, writing a check to charity today.
Very different.
We try to control what we give, don't we?
It seems that way.
Back then, it was about acknowledging that it all comes from somewhere.
Very different mindset.
But before we go too deep on that, I want to go back to the devoted thing.
Okay.
It's fascinating, but also kind of scary.
It's definitely both.
So what did it really mean to be devoted in those days?
The word in Hebrew, it's harem. It implies like being totally set apart.
Separate from the world.
And dedicated to God completely. Yeah. But as you said, it's not always happy.
Right. Dedicating a sacred object, that makes sense.
Sure.
But when it's a whole city or people,
it gets much more complicated then.
That's where I get lost. How is that devotion? It seems opposite of everything else.
It's a hard question, and there are no easy answers. We have to remember we're looking back through our modern eyes.
Our values are different.
Their understanding of war, of justice, of God's role. It was all different.
It's easy to judge, but we got to try and understand their world.
Exactly.
But still, violence is devotion? That's hard to grasp.
It is a tough one. And it reminds us that even sacred texts, they can be twisted.
Used for harm.
Sadly, yes. So how do we reconcile that? The justice and the violence.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question again, isn't it?
It is, and I don't think there's a simple answer.
Maybe wrestling with that difficulty is the point, though.
You might be.
Makes us think about ourselves, our history, how powerful belief can be.
It's a humbling experience, for sure.
But we got to have these talks, even if they're tough.
Absolutely.
It shows us how complex humans are.
And how much our values change over time.
Right. And it shows how complex these old texts are, too.
Leviticus isn't just a rule book. It's about human experience, these huge questions about faith, life, and all that.
So we've got this price tag on everything, people to possessions. We've got this crazy Jubilee year resetting society.
Right.
But there's one more piece we got to look at. The tithe. Still around today, but in ancient Israel, this was a whole other level.
It really was. It was part of life, both economically and spiritually.
A way to show they depended on God, that they were responsible to each other.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What were they giving exactly?
Yeah.
And how did it actually work?
All right, so picture this. You're right. Picture this. The Jubilee year. Every 50 years, boom, it's like hitting a giant reset button. Debts, gone. Land goes back to the original families. And if you were an indentured servant, freedom.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, honestly. Like a system to prevent people from getting too rich.
That's a big part of it. It's like saying, look, we all get caught up in the game trying to get ahead.
But every 50 years, let's remember what really matters.
Exactly, a level playing field. And it wasn't just talk either. There are actual rules, like a whole process for how it worked.
So they actually did it. Not just a nice idea. They actually reset society every 50 years.
Well, there's some debate about how often it really happened.
I can imagine. Pretty big upheaval, right?
Huge. Some scholars think it was more like an ideal, something to aim for.
Like God's desire for justice, but maybe too hard to always pull off.
Right. Like a blueprint for a better society.
Even if they didn't always get it right, it's still a powerful thought. There's more to life than just, you know, stuff.
Definitely. It says something about believing that every person has value no matter what.
Jubilee was a way to make sure everyone had a chance.
A chance to be part of the community no matter what their situation was.
Honestly, that sounds pretty radical even today.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? What would happen if we tried something like that and now W?
Get relief, land going back to original owners. That'd shake things up.
It'd be fascinating to see how people would react.
Speaking of shaking things up, can we go back to that devoted idea?
Sure.
It's just, I can't get it out of my head.
It's one of those things in Leviticus that really makes you think.
On the one hand, I get it right. Total commitment. Some things are so sacred.
You gotta set them apart.
Like, imagine a holy relic, a special place. Gotta protect it, keep it pure.
Makes sense.
But then, you said whole cities, groups of people could be devoted.
It's the darker side of this concept.
And that meant destroyed, right?
That was the idea.
How is that devotion? Seems like the opposite of being good, just.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest parts to understand, I think.
I mean, I try to see through their eyes, their time.
Their worldview is different, that's for sure.
But to think that violence could be holy, that messes with me.
This is a valid reaction. Even holy books, they can be used for terrible things.
So how do we deal with that? Leviticus has all this stuff about justice, caring for people.
Then he's got this violence, yeah.
Makes it hard to know what to make of it.
It really does. Maybe that's part of why we still study these texts.
To make us confront the hard stuff.
It makes us look at ourselves, at history, and realize how powerful beliefs can be, for good or bad.
Definitely not a comfortable experience.
Not always.
But important to talk about it anyway.
I think so. It helps us see how complicated we are as humans, how much our values change over time.
And it shows us that these old texts, they're not simple either.
Not at all. Leviticus isn't just a bunch of rules.
It's people struggling with big questions, questions we still ask today.
About faith, morality, the meaning of it all.
So we've got this price tag on everything, this crazy Jubilee year to shake things up.
Yeah.
One more piece to look at, the tithe, which still exists today.
It does, but in ancient Israel, it was way more than just, putting money in a basket.
It was woven into their lives, their whole system, a tangible way to live out their beliefs.
It was a way to say, we depend on God.
And we have a duty to each other.
Exactly.
All right, let's unpack this ancient tithe system a bit more. What exactly were they giving, and how did it all actually work back then?
So, Ahmad.
Okay, so we're back, and we've been talking about this whole tithing system, right?
Yeah.
Giving 1/10 of your crops, your livestock, all that to the Lord.
Right, and as we were saying, it's not just about the stuff itself.
Yeah, it's deeper than that. It's like acknowledging where all that abundance comes from.
Exactly. It's like they were tithing on the very blessings themselves,
It really makes you think about how we do things today. So disconnected.
Oh, yeah, we just swipe a card, click a button, done.
But back then, it was part of their lives. Every harvest, every new animal born.
Woven into the fabric of their society. And it wasn't just about being personally religious either.
Right. It was about the community.
Supporting the community, especially the Levites. They were like the priests.
Okay, right. Dedicated to the temple and all that.
Exactly. So the tithe that helped support them, made sure everyone had what they needed.
Like a built-in safety net.
Yeah.
But what about, like, the people who couldn't afford to give 1/10?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Were they, like, punished or something?
The text doesn't specifically say, okay.
But you got to think, they had the Jubilee year, right, to help prevent extreme poverty.
Right.
So it's safe to assume there was some flexibility.
Compassion, understanding, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems like that was a big part of their worldview.
It's interesting, though, they were so strict about that no swapping rule.
Yeah, the no swapping.
Why was it so important to give 1/10 of everything, even the bad stuff?
I think it goes back to what we were saying before, acknowledging the whole picture.
Good and bad.
The blessings and the struggles.
Yeah.
Recognizing that ultimately it all comes from somewhere else.
We're just stewards of it all, even the messed up stuff.
It's a humbling thought, for sure.
Yeah, it really is. Makes you think about gratitude. It's easy to just give the best we have, right?
Of course, the shiny stuff.
But to give it all, the good, the bad, the ugly.
That's a different level of honesty, isn't it?
It really is. This whole deep dive into Leviticus has made me think about giving in a whole new way.
Me too.
It's not just about money or stuff.
It's an attitude. Yeah. Generosity, gratitude, all that in every part of your life.
That's a great way to put it.
And it shows, right? These ancient texts, they still have something to teach us.
They really do. They challenge us, inspire us.
Help us live better lives, maybe.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, we've come to the end of our deep dive into Leviticus chapter 27.
We covered a lot of ground.
Valuations, the Jubilee year, the tithe.
And we found some surprising connections to our lives today, didn't we?
Yeah, the past isn't as far away as we think.
It still shapes us, even if we don't realize it.
So to all our listeners, keep diving deep, right? Read these texts, ask questions.
Challenge your assumptions.
See what ancient wisdom you can find.
And until next time.
Happy diving, everyone.